I was 21 years old the night it happened. I have replayed that night in my mind for 50 years. Not because I wanted to remember it, but because I tried so hard to forget it. And today, I'm finally going to tell you what really happened. I grew up in a small town where nothing ever truly changed. The same grocery store, the same church bells every Sunday, the same whispers traveling faster than truth. At 21, I thought my life was simple. I was engaged. I worked at the local diner. I believed the world was kind if you stayed kind. That was my first mistake. The man I was engaged to, Daniel, was respected, quiet, reliable, the kind of man parents approved of instantly. My father liked him. My mother trusted him. And in a town like ours, that was enough. But what no one knew, not even me at first, was that Daniel had a temper. Not loud, not violent in the way people expect. His anger was quiet, cold, calculated. It showed itself in small ways. The way he corrected me in public, the way he decided who I should speak to, the way he slowly, gently convinced me I was too sensitive. At 21, I mistook control for protection. One night, late summer, we had an argument. It wasn't even dramatic. I had told him I might apply for a job in the city, just part-time, just something different. He didn't yell. He smiled, and that smile scared me more than shouting ever could. "You don't need the city," he said softly. "You have everything here." But I didn't. I had potential, and he could see it, and that frightened him. That night, after the argument, I walked home alone from his house. It was past midnight. The streets were empty. The air was thick and heavy, and that's when everything changed. I won't describe every detail, not because I can't, but because some memories don't need to be relived to be understood. What matters is this: I was followed, and I was hurt, not by Daniel, not by someone I knew, but by someone who never faced consequences. I didn't scream. I didn't fight loudly. I froze. People don't talk about that part enough, how sometimes your body protects you by shutting down. When I got home, I washed my hands for almost an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Daniel. I told myself something I would repeat for decades: just move on. And I did. Or at least I pretended to. 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. Daniel assumed it was his. I let him believe that, because explaining the truth would have destroyed more than just my reputation. In 1970, in a small town, a woman didn't survive stories like that. She became them, and I wasn't strong enough then to fight an entire town. So I buried it. I married Daniel. I carried that pregnancy quietly, and I told myself something I would keep telling myself for 50 years. This is the best way. But secrets don't disappear. They settle. They sit inside you like a stone, and they shape every decision you make. Every time my son looked at me, I felt love, real love, but I also felt guilt, because he deserved truth, and I gave him silence. Daniel never suspected. Or maybe he did. Maybe men like him always know more than they admit. Over the years, our marriage became exactly what you'd expect. Predictable, controlled, emotionally distant. He never hit me. He never screamed. He simply made sure I never grew beyond him. And I let him. Because when you carry one secret, you convince yourself you deserve small prisons. That's how shame works. It doesn't chain you. It convinces you to sit still. My son grew up kind, gentle, different from Daniel. Sometimes I wondered if blood truly defined anything at all. For 50 years, I told no one, not my sister, not my closest friend, not even the man I later remarried after Daniel passed. 50 years of silence until 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. I received a letter, a DNA test result. My grandson had taken one of those online ancestry kits. Curiosity, he said. Family history. Harmless. Except it wasn't. Because genetics don't care about silence, and secrets don't expire. That letter didn't just bring questions. It brought truth. And for the first time in 50 years, I realized I no longer had anything left to protect. When my grandson called me, his voice wasn't curious. It was careful. "Grandma, can I ask you something strange?" I knew in that exact second that 50 years of silence had just run out. My grandson, Ethan, is 27, smart, analytical, gentle in the way my son always was. He told me he'd taken one of those ancestry DNA tests, just for fun, to map out family roots. "It's weird," he said softly. "There's someone showing up as close family, but not connected to Grandpa." Daniel had been dead for nearly 15 years. The man I married after him, Robert, had never legally adopted my son. And that's when the pattern began forming in Ethan's mind. "I think Dad might not be Grandpa Daniel's biological son." There it was, the sentence I had spent half a century avoiding. I didn't respond immediately. A silence over the phone can say more than words ever could. "Grandma?" he asked again. "I'm here," I said, and in my chest something old and buried began to tremble. He wasn't accusing, he wasn't angry. He was confused, and that hurt more than judgment ever would have. I asked him to come over, in person, because truths like this don't belong on speakerphone. That afternoon, he sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed school forms, baked birthday cakes, helped with homework. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like waiting. "I didn't tell Dad yet," he said. "Good. Because if I was going to shatter something, I wanted to control how it broke." He slid the printed DNA report across the table. There it was, a match. A name I didn't recognize, but one that meant everything. A biological relative tied to the man who had hurt me that night. The man who disappeared from town 2 weeks later. The man whose name I forced myself to forget. I stared at the page for a long time. Ethan didn't rush me. He just watched, careful, respectful. "Grandma," he said gently, "what aren't we being told?" That question wasn't cruel. It was honest, and honesty is heavier than accusation. For 50 years, I believed I was protecting everyone. My parents from shame, Daniel from humiliation, my son from confusion, myself from blame. But sitting there across from a young man who deserved answers, I realized something devastating. Silence protects no one. It only delays impact. I need to talk to your father first, I said quietly. Ethan nodded. He didn't push. He didn't demand. And in that moment, I saw the same kindness my son carried as a boy. That made it harder, because what I was about to say wouldn't just change history. It would rewrite identity. That evening, I called my son. He lives 2 states away now, married, 2 children, stable life, the kind of life I always hoped he'd have. He answered on the second ring. Mom, I need you to come this weekend, I said. He didn't ask why. Maybe something in my voice told him enough. When he arrived Saturday afternoon, I almost lost my nerve. He hugged me the way grown sons hug aging mothers, gently, aware of fragility. We sat in the living room. No television, no distractions, just us. There's something I should have told you a long time ago, I began. He leaned forward slightly. Concern, not suspicion. And that broke me a little, because good men don't deserve inherited confusion. I didn't tell you the whole truth about your father, I said. He frowned. What do you mean? Daniel had raised him. Daniel had signed every school paper. Daniel had taught him how to fix a tire. But biology is ruthless, and secrets are patient. There was a night, I said slowly, before I married Daniel. I watched realization move across his face in stages, confusion, calculation, then something like fear. You're saying... I was attacked, I said. The word hung in the air. Attacked. Not scandal, not affair, not mistake. He didn't interrupt. And he didn't look away. He just listened. And I kept speaking. Because once a secret leaves your mouth, it moves faster than regret. I didn't tell anyone, I said. Not even Daniel. His jaw tightened. But he knew the timeline, my son said carefully. Yes. And he never... No. Daniel had always known there was a possibility. He chose not to confront it, because in small towns, image often outweighs truth. My son stood up, walked to the window, stood there for a long time. I let him. People need space to reorganize identity. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, not angry, just wounded, and that hurt more than shouting ever could. Because I thought silence would protect you, I said. From what? From becoming a story. He turned back to face me. I'm not a story, he said quietly. I'm your son. That sentence shattered something inside me, because he was right. He had always been my son, not defined by DNA, not reduced to violence, not shaped by one night, but still, he deserved truth. I'm sorry, I whispered. He walked back over, sat down, and after a long pause, he said something I never expected. I don't care who my biological father is. Relief washed through me, but it was incomplete, because this wasn't just about identity. It was about a man who never faced consequence, and a secret that had shaped an entire life. "Does Dad know?" he asked, meaning Daniel. "No." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that's for the best." Maybe. But silence had already done enough damage. And what I didn't know yet was that this wasn't the end of exposure. It was only the beginning, because the DNA test hadn't just found family. It had found a name, and that name still existed, alive. The man who hurt me didn't disappear. He didn't die. He didn't vanish into some forgotten corner of history. He built a life, a respected one. And now, my family had found his name. 3 days after I told my son the truth, Ethan called again. "Grandma," I ran the name. Of course he did. He's from a generation that doesn't let information sit quietly. They search, they verify, they uncover. "What did you find?" I asked. There was a pause. "He's alive." I closed my eyes. 50 years. 50 years I convinced myself he was gone. But evil doesn't evaporate. It relocates. "He owns a construction company 2 counties over," Ethan continued. "Married. 3 kids." Married, children. A family portrait, I imagined. A respectable man in pressed shirts and Sunday smiles. But did his wife know? Did his children? Did he ever think about the girl he followed down a quiet street in late August? I doubt it. Men like that rarely revisit what doesn't inconvenience them. "What's his name?" my son asked quietly from across the room. I hadn't said it out loud in decades. It felt foreign on my tongue. "Thomas Hale." Saying it didn't free me. It just made it real. My son nodded slowly. "I want to see him." That sentence hit harder than I expected. "This isn't about revenge," I said carefully. "It's not revenge," he replied. "It's clarity." Clarity. The thing I denied him for 50 years. Part of me wanted to stop him, to insist the past stay buried. But I had already done that once, and silence had consequences. "He doesn't know," I said. "About me?" "Yes." My son sat down again, rubbing his hands together slowly, the same way he used to when nervous before school presentations. "So he just lived?" he asked. "Yes." No jail, no trial, no consequence, just a clean narrative. My grandson spoke up then. "Grandma, are you afraid?" That question was honest. And yes, I was. Not of Thomas, not anymore. I was afraid of reopening something that had finally scarred over. But scars don't disappear because they're hidden. They just become part of your structure. "If you meet him," I said carefully, "you need to understand something." "What?" "He owes you nothing legally." My son's eyes hardened slightly. "But morally?" That was different. Morality doesn't expire. 2 weeks later, without telling me beforehand, my son drove to the address listed online. I didn't know until he called me afterward. "I saw him," he said. My heart dropped. "And?" "He's older, grayer, smaller than I imagined." Time humbles faces, but it doesn't rewrite history. "Did you talk to him?" "Yes." My hands trembled slightly. And what did he say? There was silence on the line. Then he denied it. Of course he did. Men who escape consequence build entire identities around denial. He said he doesn't remember that night. Memory is selective when accountability is involved. My son continued. He said you must have confused him with someone else. I let out a slow breath. Gaslighting doesn't lose its flavor with age. But here's the part you won't expect, my son added. Well, he knew your name. That stopped me. What? He said it before I did. My pulse quickened. So he remembered, not the crime, but the girl, the inconvenience, the almost problem. He looked nervous when I mentioned the DNA test, my son said. And then he told me to leave his property. That sounded more familiar. Control, dismissal, authority posture. But this time, the boy he thought he could intimidate was a 50-year-old man. My son didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just said something simple before walking away. I know who I am. That sentence mattered because identity doesn't belong to the aggressor. It belongs to the survivor. When my son came home that evening, he stopped by my house. He didn't look angry. He looked resolved. I don't need him, he said quietly. That sentence healed something I didn't know was still open. For 50 years, I feared that truth would fracture him. Instead, it strengthened him. But the story wasn't finished, because 2 days later, Thomas Hale called me. He somehow got my number. His voice was older, rougher, but unmistakable. I don't know what you're trying to start, he said. I didn't respond immediately. 50 years ago, I froze. This time, I didn't. I'm not starting anything, I said calmly. I'm ending silence. He inhaled sharply. You're going to ruin my family. I almost laughed. Ruin. Interesting choice of word. You ruined something first, I replied. There was no apology, no remorse, just fear. Not fear of guilt, fear of exposure. Huh? You can't prove anything, he said. He was right. There were no witnesses, no police report, no physical evidence, just DNA and truth. I don't need to prove it publicly, I said quietly. I just needed my family to know. That was the shift. I wasn't seeking courtrooms. I was reclaiming narrative. He hung up without another word. And as I placed the phone down, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't afraid. For the first time in 50 years, I felt steady. But closure is rarely simple, because Thomas Hale's wife hadn't heard from me yet, and neither had his children. I could have ruined his life. One phone call, one letter, one public post. That's all it would have taken. For 50 years, I carried the silence. Now I held the power. After Thomas called me, I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood something new. For the first time in half a century, the balance had shifted. He was afraid. Not of jail, not of lawsuits, of exposure. And exposure is a currency more powerful than punishment. My son came over the next morning. He could see something had changed in me. "Are you going to tell his wife?" he asked directly. That was the question sitting in the center of everything. Thomas had built a family, a wife who likely believed she married a good man, at children who probably thought their father was respectable. Was it my place to tear that open? "He didn't think about my future," my son said quietly. That was true, but vengeance and justice don't always share the same path. "I don't want revenge," I said slowly. "I want peace." My grandson Ethan looked at me carefully. "Grandma, sometimes peace requires truth." That sentence stayed with me because he wasn't wrong. But truth is not neutral. It disrupts, it fractures, it exposes collateral damage. Later that afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 50 years. I wrote a letter, not emotional, not dramatic, just facts. The date, the location, the DNA confirmation, and one simple line: "I am not asking for anything, and I'm informing you because you deserve to know." I addressed it to Thomas's wife. I didn't send it immediately. I left it on my kitchen table for 3 days. Every morning I looked at it. Every night I questioned it. My son didn't push me. He told me something I didn't expect. "Mom, I don't need him exposed to feel whole." That changed everything, because for years I believed silence protected my son. Now I understood something deeper. He didn't need revenge to define himself. He already knew who he was. The real question wasn't about Thomas. It was about me. Did I want to spend my final years reopening wounds? Or did I want to close the door quietly and finally let myself breathe? On the 4th day, I drove to the post office. The letter sat in my purse, heavy, final. But as I stood in line, I noticed something. My hands weren't shaking. They were steady. Not with anger, with clarity. And clarity brings responsibility. Just before reaching the counter, I stepped out of line, walked back to my car, and tore the envelope open. Not because he deserved protection, but because I realized something important. His wife's pain would not heal mine. His children's shock would not restore my youth. And exposure for the sake of disruption would only continue the chain. That doesn't mean silence again. It means choice. Instead of mailing the letter to his wife, I mailed a different one, to Thomas. Inside I wrote, "I don't need your apology. I don't need your confession. I don't need your guilt. I needed my family to know the truth. Now they do. That you can live with your version, I will live with mine." That was the difference. For 50 years, I lived with his silence. Now he would live with mine, knowing I was no longer afraid. 2 weeks passed. No reply. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived, no return address. Inside was a single handwritten note. "I was young. I was stupid. I don't remember it the way you do. I'm sorry if you were hurt." If. That word tells you everything. There was no full accountability, no admission, just the language of someone trying to minimize damage. But something surprising happened when I read it. I didn't feel rage. I felt release. because I no longer needed him to validate what happened. For decades, part of me wondered if I exaggerated it, if I misunderstood it, if maybe I should have fought harder. That's what trauma does. It questions itself. But now, DNA doesn't question. My son doesn't question, and I don't question. The truth is stable, and stability is freedom. That evening I sat with my son on the porch, sunset spilling across the yard. "You could have destroyed him," he said. "Yes," I replied. "Why didn't you?" I looked at him, really looked at him, because I didn't want to become someone who lives on destruction. He nodded slowly, and in that moment I realized something powerful. The secret didn't own me anymore. The silence didn't define me. And the man who thought he erased consequence now lives knowing exposure is only one decision away. That's not revenge. That's accountability suspended. And sometimes that's heavier than public shame. But the story wasn't finished, because there was still one conversation left, the one with myself. For 50 years, I thought the secret was protecting me. I was wrong. It was protecting my fear. And the day I finally spoke, I realized I had never been weak, only silent. After Thomas's letter arrived, life didn't explode. There were no scandals, no newspaper headlines, no late-night arguments, just something quieter. Breathing, real breathing, for the first time in decades. I felt like I was occupying my own body instead of hiding inside it. My son visited every weekend that month, not because he needed answers anymore, but because something between us had shifted. Honesty creates a different kind of closeness, one built on truth instead of assumption. One evening, he asked me something I had avoided thinking about. "Do you regret not telling me sooner?" That question deserved honesty. "Yes," I said, not because I doubted my intention back then, but because silence cost us years of openness. He nodded. "I'm not angry," he said quietly. "I just wish you didn't carry it alone." That sentence hurt more than any accusation could have, because it was true. I carried it alone. I let shame isolate me. I convinced myself that protection required invisibility, but protection without truth is just postponement. Later that week, I visited Daniel's grave, not out of guilt, not out of longing, but out of clarity. Daniel had lived his life believing my son was biologically his. Maybe he suspected otherwise. Maybe he didn't. But I stood there and realized something important. He raised him. Fevers ran high at night. Daniel did. For fevers ran high at night. Daniel did. For all his flaws, and there were many, he showed up. And that mattered. Standing there, I whispered something I had never said out loud. You weren't his father by blood, but you were his father by choice. That distinction healed something inside me, because truth doesn't erase history. It clarifies it. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle changes in myself. I spoke more directly. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I allowed myself to say, "That hurt me," without minimizing it. For decades, I believed endurance was strength. But endurance without voice is just survival. Strength is speaking, even when your voice shakes. Thomas never contacted me again. I doubt he ever will. Maybe he believes silence protects him. Maybe he tells himself a different version of that night. That's his burden now, not mine. And that is the greatest shift of all. For 50 years, I carried both sides of the story. Now I carry only mine. My grandson, Ethan, came over last Sunday. He looked at me differently, not with pity, not with fragility, but with respect. "You're stronger than I thought," he said. I smiled gently. "I was always strong," I replied. "I just didn't know it." That's the tragedy of silence. It convinces you that surviving quietly is weakness. It isn't. It's adaptation. But adaptation should never be permanent. If I could speak to the 21-year-old girl walking home that night, I would tell her this: what happened to you does not define you. The silence you choose will. And if you ever decide to break it, you will not shatter. You will steady. I am 72 now. I have wrinkles, softened hands, and memories that no longer control me. The secret didn't destroy my life, but it shaped it. It shaped the marriage I tolerated, the confidence I suppressed, the boundaries I didn't draw. But today I draw them clearly. I lived with a secret for 50 years. Today I broke my silence, not to destroy a man, not to expose a scandal, not to rewrite history, but to reclaim myself. And that is freedom.